All people do now is they hyper silo themselves, and then they live in that hole all the time.
Almost every milestone I see happen on Twitter, it could be made up for all I know. And I wouldn't know that it was fake. There's so much segmentation.
One of the causes as to why there are so many reboots is because that's kind of all that's left for a mass audience to understand.
What do you do as a creator or somebody trying to offer any kind of value when you've got hyper-segmentation and then like a general 5-gallon bucket of slop on the other side?
Hey, welcome to The Create Unknown, the home of Make Something Mean Something. I am Kevin Lieber. We have no cultural foundation, and with me as always is Matthew Tabor.
It's worse than that. It's worse. Like, there are old foundations, like on this property, whatever. You can see where a building has been. It's crumbled. It's useless. But you see this plot, you're like, oh, something good was happening there at some time. No. This is worse. It's beyond not having a cultural foundation. It's like, how do you poison a foundation? How do you dig a trench where a foundation was and then fill it with sewage, broken glass, and vipers?
I've read
That's
that
the foundation.
Groundhogs are pretty good at ruining your foundation. So maybe we just have a whole family of groundhogs digging into our cultural foundation, eroding it from the bottom out
into the Western world.
Yeah,
you got the termites above ground, and then you've got the groundhogs below tunneling. It's bad. Whatever's happening, it's bad.
Yeah. And so we've talked, a lot about stories being bad, and a lot of people talk about how many reboots are happening in Hollywood and on television in general. Everything is a reboot. And so at the end of last week's episode, you started talking about this topic about, cultural foundations and like how the erosion of that is causing a lot of things to get really weird and boring. And coincidentally, which actually often happens, I had been thinking about this for quite a bit. Now, I enjoy this topic. I've watched a lot of different YouTubers kind of talk about how Hollywood is just retreading the same stories and why, and it's boring, and audiences are getting tired of it for a lot of different reasons. But there were a couple of things that I thought I could bring to this topic that I hadn't heard anyone else talk about. Now, I want to bring this to talking about like parochial bubbles. Okay. I don't know. I don't know if this is a term, so I'm just kind of inventing a term. I'm going to say it's called parochial bubbles. Now, when anything develops as far as like a scene, okay, let's use like the Seattle grunge era as an example, because I think that's a really well understood version of in the early 90s, well, really starting in the late 80s and then being popularized in the early 90s. There was a scene in Seattle, in one city in the northwestern corner of the United States, where it rains all the time and it's very gloomy. And the musicians, the bands in and around that city were starting to reject what was largely kind of like an LA music scene, like a sort of a Hollywood music scene.
I want to pause you really quick.
Okay.
Can you give one sentence to describe can you say what a scene is? And this is, I know this is obnoxious, but I feel like it might be hard to understand a scene for the younger set, because I can't think of one now. I can't think of like a modern example of a scene that's in a location.
That's really what I want to talk about in general
Oh, okay. Okay.
today. Like this idea of a scene, what I was calling a parochial bubble, which is probably a stupid and convoluted way to just say scene. So,
Okay.
the way a scene develops is that you have to have some sort of insulation within that scene. So you have like a locus for the scene. So let's say Seattle, Washington is your locus. And the various people around that location start to influence each other. And so this band hears this band and they're friends with this band and they're all together. They go to the same shows. They kind of are listening to the same music. They start wearing similar clothing and growing their hair the same way. All of this happens kind of emergent in an emergent manner, organically, but isolated. Like the important part of a scene is there has to be isolation for that group to not be continually bombarded with influences from outside of that bubble. Okay. That's the only way that this really can happen, is that, people are together in some fixed location or some sort of fixed group, and they develop their own style, whether that's artistically or socially or how they speak or, slang, that sort of thing. And there isn't a whole lot of outside influences penetrating that bubble. And as a result, what happens is that something really unique can be created. So that's what happened with Seattle grunge. Is like all of the people, for whatever reason, maybe because it was raining all the time, and they just, I mean, the weather has a lot to do in general with art. Like there's a reason like black metal comes from Scandinavian countries, and Caribbean music is very dance focused because you're drinking rum and dancing and you want something fun to dance to. Like that's its own, little tangent. But anyway, all of those people, all of those musicians wanted to do something different than what was being done and had been done for the past roughly decade, especially in like the harder rock genre, which was very glam. You had glam rock, you had hair metal. So the bands would tease their hair and they would wear makeup and they would wear tight leather pants. And that scene was its own thing, right? That was its own bubble, where all of those bands on the Whiskey Go-Go or whatever.
That's right. Whiskey a Go-Go.
Hollywood and Vine.
Yeah, Hollywood and Vine. Absolutely. That was where, that's what bred like Guns N' Roses out of, the LA Guns. And I mean, there's that whole progression through the 80s where this was happening in LA. You weren't getting a band like Guns N' Roses out of Toledo, Ohio. It didn't work that way. The conditions were not there to produce it. You had some imitators eventually that were, steps behind, but the like cutting edge aspect of it was happening in that particular era with those particular people.
And what happens though in that time before the internet is that, locally, a scene could develop, whether it was hair metal or grunge or pop punk, whatever it was. Pop punk was more like skaters, I'm assuming Southern California, or boy bands out of Florida, right? Like all that pop music, NSYNC and Britney Spears and Backstreet Boys, that was all out of Florida. But what would happen is then everyone else would say, hey, here's something new. Here's something different. I like this. And then it exploded and got mass appeal. And now all of a sudden, like these were the most popular bands or artists on earth, right? That 100% does not happen anymore, because everyone has access to everyone and everything at the same time. You cannot have that isolation, which causes it's like making a diamond. It causes like a compression effect and then something unique comes out of it, something shiny and beautiful that is valuable and people want. That is gone because everybody is watching the same shows and watching the same movies and playing the same video games and listening to the same music or whatever. There are no barriers. There are no walls to any
no
of
borders
it.
on this anymore.
There's no borders. Yeah. There's no borders to creativity.
And you don't have to pay dues to get in either. So like you couldn't say, like, oh, I listened to these 4 or 5 bands. This is in 1987. You're like, oh, I'm a huge, Guns N' Roses fan. I love Cinderella. I'll even listen to the occasional Rat cassette tape and enjoy it. Whatever. You couldn't be like that and then pick up your stuff and go to LA and just start being a part of it. I mean, you had to make your way in. You had to kind of penetrate those scenes to be in those scenes. Otherwise, you were absolutely on the outside looking in and being, a little bit of a pretender. Well, now there's really not that same sort of barrier where you can kind of access anybody and quite quickly, if not from day one, just be a part of some online community. So like the whole dynamic has both shifted and changed, and also it's been kind of eliminated in many ways. This changes everything. This changes that result that you're talking about when the pressures are different, and it's not all like pressure stuff. But when all the pieces of the dynamic are different, the result is going to be just not the same as that self-contained diamond formation that you're talking about.
Yeah. So what we're left with now is that communities, obviously, and scenes, in a way, still 100% exist virtually. And not only do they exist, but in many ways, it's like all people do now is they hyper silo themselves into whatever like grain-sized hole they fit in, and then they live in that hole all the time. And that could be like a D&D hole, a Warhammer hole, a Roblox hole, a Minecraft hole, a FromSoft video game hole. Like you can really drill down into a super hyper extremely specific thing and then make an entire career out of it. I mean, there's a YouTuber, VaatiVidya, who all he does is explain the lore of From Software video games and has like millions of subscribers and puts together like $200 books that are collections of art from the video games. And this is all this guy does. It's just one developer's video games is his entire life, is his entire livelihood, and has, millions of fans who gather and watch his videos and discuss them or whatever. And they are hidden from everyone else on the planet. Like Matt, have you ever heard of VaatiVidya? Do you have any idea who that is?
I mean, look, I have to say yes, because you've mentioned this guy before.
Oh, damn.
But I didn't recognize when you said the name, but when you started talking about the books, I was like, oh, I remember you talking about, this guy making the books. Yeah. I mean, no, I wouldn't have encountered it if I didn't know somebody who was in the scene.
Right. I'm loosely in that scene because I'm a big fan of those games. That's how I know who he is. But that's the world that we're in now, where like everyone is a huge, puts all of their energy into like a really niche thing that no one else knows about, which is very, very different than what I'm using as a counterexample in terms of the LA, glam rock scene or the Seattle grunge scene, where those things translated into mass appeal. Those things, blossomed into something that everybody knew. They touched everyone, whether you liked it or not. You knew who Nirvana was. You knew who Guns N' Roses were. Everybody did. It was impossible not to. So that is part of the reason, I think, and that was like the precursor to what I was trying to get to. What I'm trying to get to with the reboot thing is that one of the reasons, and there are many, everything is multivariate. Nothing is just one cause. But I think one of the causes that I haven't necessarily heard someone mention as to why there are so many reboots is because that's kind of all that's left for a mass audience to even understand. Like, all that's left is, hey, do you remember King of the Hill? Hey, do you remember the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Hey, do you remember The Lion King? Well, now there's a live action version, right? It's like we're scavenging and picking the bones of properties that at one time were just one of many original properties. There were many, many new ones each year. But now the only ways for people outside of their little tiny niche to even know what's going on, to poke their head out of their sand and look around and know that there's something that like other people know about, is Superman and Star Wars and Spider-Man and Batman. And it's things that like already existed and had mass appeal a long time ago. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. It's a really strange phenomenon here. And I mean, I understand the appeal of the established things. You look at something like a Superman movie just came out. Okay. That's a really old character. And if you think of like the 1950s, I wish Boss Threads were here because he is a Superman authority. I remember more than 25 years ago, the Los Angeles Times took his Superman history website and featured it as like their website of the day because it was so complete on all Supermans from like day one effort into, at that time, just Christopher Reeve. I can't remember which year in the 30s. Jen says 30s. I want to say it was like 38. If somebody can pull that up.
It's a good guess.
Pull that up for me, Jamie. We need a Rogan monkey
Detective Comics
to do our bidding.
#1. Wasn't that what it
wasn't it Action Comics?
Oh, Action Comics. It was Detective Batman. I'm not a comic book person.
Either way, so that's 85 years plus. Okay, because 85 years would be 1940. In 1950, 1938 confirmed. Very good. 87 years. In 1950, how many characters were people pulling from the 1860s culturally? Not really any. There were some books people still read, some classics, but there wasn't, it wasn't a developing, evolving force the way something like Superman or, we're seeing with Marvel going back so long, all this stuff. So the concept of rebooting and all of that is relatively new. It wasn't really possible to reboot. But there was less, shared culture too, back in the really pre-radio days. That's when you got to blast culture to a big radius. And that's when you got to put, information quickly and cheaply and easily to a lot of people, the same information. Well, okay. That happens for a generation or two, and you get a little nostalgia and you get some reasons to update it. You get new stories, all of this. So I understand the phenomenon kind of happening, but there was all of this local, really scenes like you're talking about that were a lot larger. Rural Indiana was a scene. There was a scene where I live that was distinctly separate, from even the towns that are nearby. These scenes still existed locally. Well, they're gone. They're gone at a time when the people making the rebooted stuff are trying to appeal to an even broader audience, not just a certain demographic. Let's say in the United States, it's literally everybody everywhere. It goes well beyond people who are speaking English worldwide. It's kind of everything. Well, how do you develop one of those tight-knit, really cool petri dishes of culture that are the scenes that you talked about, when the whole game is trying to appeal to everybody? Well, your best bet is finding like-minded people online, and this happens. We've both done it. Kevin, you're into some niche things. I've said to you many times how fantastic the vintage gun and reloading community is. These are the best people in the world. They're all old. I'm at my age, like grandson age for most of them. But they're awesome. And so there will be like a deep dive. One of my favorite things is the Browning Auto 5. And this was invented in 1898. It's a shotgun that was just a remarkable piece of technology by John Browning. And it's had iterations, all through the 20th century. You can still buy an A5 now. I get to go down that rabbit hole with totally like-minded people. And we honestly don't talk about anything else. We don't talk about, our lives and where we are and this and that, unless it's like in my area, you can get this A5 for $600. But yeah, nobody's actually interfacing very much. That's cool in a way, but you have this dichotomy where it's like you're making the $200, FromSoft books for a tight niche of people, or your other option is to throw on some slop that has been algorithmically designed to appeal to 6 billion people from Canada to Calcutta.
Right. And I have questions about, so this is one thing I haven't been able to work out. So I don't really have an answer for this. But it seems to me that even though the internet and social media and things like Discord and YouTube have allowed people to gravitate and find each other over like micro niches, which is just an absolutely incredible thing, whether it's you with like this gun community or me with a specific style of video game. That's very cool. And that was obviously something that was impossible pre-internet. And that's something else that's probably really hard for anyone under the age of 30 to understand is, so as an example, I really liked anime, in the days where you can only watch anime on VHS tapes. It was really expensive. There was like one store an hour and a half away from my house that sold anime VHS tapes. So
I was going to ask where you even bought them. How did you acquire these?
There was a store in the Crossgates Mall in Albany.
Okay.
I think it was called Suncoast that had, for some reason, they had like a small anime section in the mid 90s, but they were,
Kevin and I didn't go into the same stores. We just really didn't. And that's why I'm like, the music stores, which also isn't so much of a thing now. But like, they had some niche media, whatever, and I didn't recall seeing any of that. So yeah, you had to make a special trip of nearly 100 miles to get the shot to buy a VHS tape of a thing you liked.
Yeah. 3-hour round trip to spend, $40 or whatever with inflation. That's like $100 probably. To buy like one tape that maybe had like 3 episodes of an anime on it. So it was hard.
It was about $100. It was, with tax, you're going to be at about 100 if it was 40. That's crazy. That's bonkers.
It was weird. It was expensive and it was difficult. So when I first got to college and I met someone else who had like Perfect Blue on VHS, I was like, my people, hello. I've never met you before. This is amazing. We are now best friends. It was an incredible experience to actually meet someone who knew what Ninja Scroll was. Like, that was crazy. Whereas, now in 2 seconds, you can argue with someone halfway around the world over whether Perfect Blue is better than Paprika or whatever. But that, there are a couple of things here. One is like that limitation bred a lot more value to the thing. Like, it brought a lot more value to the hobby when it was difficult and rare, and you only could get a few things at a time, and you didn't just have access to watching everything anywhere. Like, there's that abundance problem. It's like the paradox of choice, right? It's like the paradox of choice for all of humanity, essentially, where, if I'm remembering correctly, the paradox choice is like an actual experiment. I think Michael did it in Minefield, where if you go around, a crowd, say you're at like an amusement park and you have a tray of 3 jelly beans, you have like cherry, lemon, and root beer. Okay. And you say, hey, free jelly beans, pick one. And, say you pick cherry. And then you ask them afterwards, are you happy with your choice? Invariably, they'll say yes. Because if you have 3 options and it's cherry, lemon, and root beer, you like cherry the best, you chose cherry, you're happy with your selection. Okay. You feel good about it. You made the right choice. If you run that same exact test, but you have 64 flavors of jelly beans, so you have cherry, you have blueberry, you have buttered popcorn, you have fried chicken. I mean, whatever. You have 64 different flavors of jelly beans, and you ask someone to pick one, and then you survey them and say, are you happy with their choice? Invariably, they are uncertain. They don't know. Because you know what? I chose cherry, but like maybe the buttered popcorn would have been better. Or maybe that fried chicken would have blown my mind. I don't know. So the abundance of choice dramatically reduces your satisfaction with what you chose. And this permeates everything.
It's hard to navigate. It does. I mean, the easiest example with this, one of the, if not the most serious example is, my parents were married until their deaths. Kevin, you came from a 2-parent household, pretty good people. I don't think people like our parents thought a tremendous amount about the alternatives they may have missed out on, not compared to now. So the access you have to people to want to date, people to marry, whatever. There are a lot of options. It's not a tray of 3 anymore like it was in my town in the 60s. You knew who you matched up with and you knew who you didn't. You were like, yeah, this is great. We're a match. Well, I mean, I think back to my progression versus my parents. I went to a school with over 20,000 students. It was huge. And they were, turning over every year too. So it was like the sheer number of people at that school alone who were potential matches for me was probably like 30,000 girls. It's nuts. And then I moved, I lived in all sorts of different places, whatever. It's like, oh, okay, well, here's all of the LA metro area that's on the table. It's like, even when it's, you have confidence, you've taken your jelly bean out of 64, and you're happy with, your choice like that. Unless you have eaten the other 63 and have a sophisticated ranking system that does relative value of all the bean flavors, you're not going to be, completely sure that you're happy. Well, you can go on, I don't know, I'm thinking back even, well, this is good. We were on the cusp of this. Kevin and I were on the cusp of this. When we were in high school, if you wanted to date somebody, you were pretty much limited to who was at your school. It was possible to run into people from other schools, whatever, but you had to be involved in something that made you cross paths, and most people weren't. I really wasn't.
I don't remember anybody dating anyone outside of school. Just to
yeah,
add
it
to your
happened
point.
occasionally.
Yeah.
And this is where the joke comes from. That's like, oh, you wouldn't know her. She goes to another school.
Right. Yeah, exactly. You don't know my girlfriend. She goes to a different school. Exactly.
Yeah. So it was impossible to verify. It's impossible to verify. Well, now I could pull out my phone and download whatever the hell is in vogue now, Hinge, Bumble, whatever, and set, farmers only. I could go on. You could set the radius. I assume at least 100 miles. I mean, I can search for an auction up to 250 miles. I imagine I could set a 250 mile radius to look at dating profiles. That's insane. That's crazy. How can you possibly go forth with confidence with anything you're doing? Now, hopefully you use some kind of screening elements and wind up with somebody who's pretty good. Maybe you get lucky along the way. But like, are you really confidently going into any of this? No. And I have to assume that's kind of miserable. That's miserable. I lived in other countries for a long time, and when I would meet people there, there's always this element of low confidence, even when you're really familiar with a place. The UK is a good example for me because I didn't go in cold. It wasn't some like totally foreign culture, and I wasn't out of my element, whatever. But I still hadn't lived there my whole life. So there's this wave of people that I certainly didn't have confidence in understanding, whether it was being friends with them or dating them or whatever. Oh, Kep says, yeah, passport mode. The passport mode is part of Tinder. See, you can search by city or drop a pin on the map to connect with others in the city of your choice. I saw this on Financial Audit. There's a guy recently, and you can find the thumbnail because he's in like African garb, but he's a white guy with a beard. Okay. And he's explaining his situation. And I forget what countries he was doing this with, but he would open up Tinder in passport mode and like message somebody from, the one he ended up, he's marrying her now, was in Africa. So that was part of his financial calculus is, yeah, she's going to come over. She's going to, not be able to work for a long time as visa stuff sorts out, so this is what my financial burden is going to be, whatever. But that's exactly what he did. I mean, you can drop a pin in Nigeria and meet somebody and figure it out. Anybody who says they have full and total confidence in how that plays out is delusional. They're hoping for the best. There's an element of crossing your fingers on that one. Everything is different. So anyway, to pull this back, you have sky high divorce rates. You have sky high single parent families, all of this. And part of that is because that paradox of choice is so difficult to navigate in a way that succeeds long term. You
have
you'd hear of somebody,
people not dating at all.
And then, yes, and that's the other, the pendulum swings that way where you look at this situation and you throw your hands up.
Yeah. You say, I don't even know where to start.
I don't know where you would. I mean, I haven't really, pretty much everybody I know is in a good spot. They're in a good, healthy spot with their relationships and stuff. So I don't know anybody personally right now who's like seriously navigating this situation. But like Jen just said, every time someone talks about modern dating, I'm happier and happier to not be single. Yeah, I don't see me ever, getting in that game as long as I live. There's no circumstance that would make me a single person where I would say, well, I'm back on the market. I'm pumped for this. Be like, no, now that I have this additional time, what work do I do outside that I couldn't get to before?
Where's my new brush cutter? I want to bring it back to culture stuff because I have more to say about that because I hope that I was able to elucidate the fact that now we have, like, everyone basically has their own culture. You get to pick and choose, if you do have an interest in something, what your culture is. The YouTuber that you're obsessed with, the video games that you're obsessed with, the Marvel movies. I'm a Star Wars guy, or whatever it is. You stay in that narrow lane, and there's no way for any of those things to reach shared culture status. And I want to talk about what shared culture status is, again, for people who never grew up in a world where there was a shared culture. And I want to talk about Cheers. I've been thinking about Cheers a lot for the last year for some reason. And one of those reasons is that I made a video last year where I had to dig through old home movies. So when I was a kid, it was a big deal by the late 80s to have a camcorder. Right now, everybody has a recording device on their person at all times. So the novelty of being able to record a moment of reality doesn't exist. There is no novelty. That's just reality now. That's everybody's life, is at any moment you can record a video of anything, anywhere, for any reason.
Yep.
By the late 80s, camcorders, consumer grade camcorders, had gotten to a point where they were rather affordable. They were still very expensive.
They were
still very expensive. It's not like everybody had one, but probably somebody in your extended family, took the leap and invested in a camcorder. And we had one when I was a kid. So, birthdays got recorded, concert recitals got recorded, first communion got recorded, any sort of major life event for a kid. My father would take out the camcorder and make a home video. There was one that I scrubbed through. I was looking for, footage of me opening Christmas toys, I think, for the Captain Power video that we made for Popular Science. And I came across a moment where my grandparents were trying to leave the event, the birthday party, whatever it was. My grandparents were saying goodbye to everybody, and they were rushing out the door to get home to watch Cheers. Okay? My Nana made it explicitly known to everyone that they had to leave now. I'm sorry, we have to leave. I love you. Goodbye. We have to get home for Cheers. Okay? Because in those days, again, I feel like we have to do a lot of explaining. Television was appointment programming. You had to sit down and watch the new episode of your show at the time, at the day and the exact time that it aired, or it was gone. Unless you set up a VCR that was timed to record that episode, which was possible. Otherwise, you were either sitting in front of your TV at the exact moment it was airing, or you were missing that episode. So she had to get out of there. She had to see the new Cheers. I had no idea growing up that my grandparents liked Cheers. That was not a thing. I had no idea until I saw this clip. Well, the reason my grandparents liked Cheers is that everyone watched Cheers in the United States at this time.
I was going to say
everyone.
They liked it because everybody with a beating heart and functioning lungs, at least, if that was the only thing there, they at least wanted to be wheeled up to the TV set to sit there catatonic as Cheers was on. That's how many people love Cheers.
So
the family pets stopped, like the cat stopped hunting mice when it was time to go in to watch Cheers.
To put some data behind this point, the series finale of Cheers was watched by over 80 million people. Okay.
Yep.
Which at that time, in terms of the total population of the US, was about 40% of the country. 40% of the entire country. 40% of the entire country. Okay. How many times do I need to emphasize this? sat down at that exact moment on that exact day in front of their TV and watched a television show about a bunch of misfit alcoholics in a basement bar in Boston.
Right. In the final episode, the one that you're talking about, was such a cultural phenomenon. I can't even, the closest thing I can compare it to is when like an extremely beloved athlete is in his final season and like, you know, if it's baseball, it's like, this is his last game at Yankee Stadium. He's doing the farewell tour. That's a thing where people are like, you know, I want to see, I remember with Albert Pujols, he had a really season-long farewell tour in a cool way. And it's like, yeah, I want to see this guy one more time because then it's gone. It's completely gone. But I mean, these shows were going to be gone too. It's not like you could just like start streaming them, you know, a year later, or years later, like people do with Friends now. It's like, no, you have to see this because it's gone after this moment. And I remember I was probably 11. Or so when the final episode hit. And it was a thing that like the world planned for, was to see the finale. That's how unified everybody was on watching this thing. You think of something like that only happening with like Apollo 11, like the moon landing.
Right.
Okay. And that did have a much greater percentage of TVs tuned in. It was like 90%, right? Yeah, it kept says MASH. It was like that with MASH.
I pulled up the MASH stats, and I was waiting for you to finish to bring up the MASH stats, because the MASH stats are crazier than Cheers. So yeah. MASH, a decade earlier, in 1983, was watched by 106 million people, which was about half of the country.
It's unfathomable. It's unfathomable. And there's not even, like, by definition, shared things like the Olympics that people tune in on to that degree. Did you look up Super Bowl stats?
The Super Bowl is really high because that's essentially like a holiday now.
Yeah, that's the only thing that is legitimately like this as a phenomenon.
Super Bowl, the last Super Bowl was 127 million people. But to me, that's very different because, like I said, it's essentially a holiday. It happens every year. Everybody knows about it. It's recurring, right? So people have parties for it. They sort of set their watch to it. And they have the commercials and the halftime show that brings in certain demographics. And whether they're watching the football game or not is really irrelevant. So it's kind of just on in the background for, I think, a lot of these homes, and a cause for gathering, like Christmas or like Thanksgiving. Whereas MASH or Cheers, that is completely different. That was a one-time thing that would be gone forever afterwards, that people truly sat down and paid attention to. So I know that, like, loosely it's the same thing. It's a lot of people watching the TV. I think contextually it's extremely different.
It is. But I mean, what's the consequence of losing the Cheers finale? And I mean, so I'm actually going to say a bit more about this, because Cheers was not like the peak entertainment for 11-year-old me.
No,
it wasn't. Like fifth graders weren't going into school talking about last night's episode of Cheers. No. And I still watched it with my parents, and I still knew it was happening. It was an event you knew everything about, even if you didn't watch Cheers or you were 11. There's not even really that stuff at play. I was talking with my nephew the other night, who is 11. He's 11 right now, for now. And I was talking to him about stuff that he liked and all this. He's listing off all these app games and stuff that he plays, and I'd never heard of any of them at all. And I'm sitting there like waiting in this list. Please say something that I can seize on. Please say something I know at least the tiniest bit about. And then he says Roblox. Okay, there's something that at least I know exists. my first instinct, I couldn't follow up with because I wanted to be like, oh, you shouldn't play that because it's filled with PDF files. That's what I see on Twitter about Roblox, but I didn't see that. I couldn't go that route. But, I knew enough about it to, talk to him about Roblox. But I mean, it was like dumping out a bucket of things and hoping I see like something catch my eye in this list because there's so little shared culture that I would even be aware of, and I'm terminally online. So I imagine somebody who isn't has an even tougher situation there, trying to find something to have in common with another human.
Yeah, I mean, think about it in terms of YouTube. Like, when it almost never happens where I meet someone and I tell them, what I do for a living, that they have any idea what I'm talking about. I mean, any idea what I'm talking about. Yeah. So, for instance, if I say, oh yeah, I make like, educational videos for YouTube, it's not like they're like, oh, like Vsauce or like, oh, like right, Veritasium. Yeah. Oh, or like whatever, fill in the blank. Oh, really? Like Tom Scott? Like I'm a big fan. No, their expression is blank. Like this is an incredibly popular thing. Vsauce has over 20 million subscribers. Veritasium might be around the 20 million mark now. Every single upload gets millions and millions of views. And I never meet anyone who has ever heard of any of it.
Yeah.
They have no idea.
I do. I'm good about once a year for this. And it's crazy because it's happened twice in 2025. But I went years without this happening, where, so going back to vintage guns, I bought an Italian World War II gun years ago. I bought it from a place in the Midwest. And when I gave my email address, for the invoice and whatever, the guy, I was like, oh, how'd you get that email? And I told him, and he knew every video. He knew every video Kevin had made. He knew every video Michael and Jake had made. He was a super fan. It was really cool. But that was like 2020, and it hadn't happened before that. This year, it was an email thing again. I was at the Horseshoe casino in Las Vegas, and I had to give my email for something. And the guy knew Vsauce videos, and it was cool. He said it. I certainly didn't prompt him. And it happened in Tbilisi, like a month ago. Happened in Tbilisi. I was in this like literally underground bar. I don't mean like hidden from the public. I mean, no. So it's like this tiny living room sized place that's beneath the street level. Yeah. And the guy I was talking to, I hung out with him a few times, and eventually, I was talking about work stuff, whatever, and he knew. So, I made a video with him and sent it to Kevin about, this guy being like, hey, Vsauce guys, whatever. But yeah, so like I can count on one hand the number of times this has resonated with another human in many years. Yeah. It doesn't happen much.
And the Vsauce channels alone have billions with a B numbers of views. Billions.
Yep.
And it never happens. So OG Baby Gang member Jeff Strife says, science pages were the first and primary channels I sub to. My point is, most people don't even know what subbing to a channel means. Like they're at that level where like YouTube as a means of engaging with in terms of entertainment on a regular basis and subscribing to channels is not even in their universe. Everyone is in their own universe. Everybody is in their own universe. So like I'm not in the podcast universe as a consumer. Obviously we have a podcast, but I don't really listen to podcasts. There are people who that's all they do. Like they are a podcast listening person. They have a handful of podcasts that they listen to and they love. And if they mention them to me, oh, do you listen to so-and-so podcast? I've never even heard of what they're talking about. So it's the same phenomena, essentially in reverse, where like, I have no idea this thing that what you love even is, despite the fact that millions of people also love that thing. I've never even heard of it. There has been like no path that I could have crossed to even become familiar with what this podcast is, or who this TikTok creator is. I mean, or who this streamer is. How many times have you seen, Matt, on Twitter where some streamer or some TikToker or somebody passes like 30 million subscribers and you have never in your once ever heard of them?
Almost always. Almost every milestone I see happen on Twitter is it could be made up for all I know. It could be like an AI generated congratulations, and I wouldn't know that it was fake. There's so much segmentation, and it's great that you can go deep. It's great that you don't have to drive 3 hours round trip to buy 3 episodes of, your anime, your weeaboo.
My Dragon Balls.
Yeah, you don't have to go buy your Dragon Balls like that and pay $100 every time you do it. It's amazing that you can hit up people whenever you want to talk about it. You have access to it everywhere. It's fantastic. And this is that paradox of choice, right? It's awesome to have 64 options for jelly beans. I like going into Walmart and making my selection out of like 40 possibilities of everything that I do. But it's also hard. It's also difficult. You get some losers now and again, some products that you don't want to repeat on, where you have to do a tremendous amount of research to have confidence in the choice you're making. I do this I just did this with a brush cutter that I bought, where I was pretty sure I knew what I wanted, but I still had to make sure there are a lot of things on the market from different companies that are at that sort of like prosumer level, where it's like you are straddling what an everyday professional would need while not being one. It took a lot. And yes, it would be a great deal easier if I just like went down to the hardware store and said, what's the biggest thing you have? I would have felt great about that whole process. It's hard. It's hard to create when this is the system, and I think this is when we segue into what's all this mean? Why does this matter? We're talking completely about being consumers of it. We're on the receiving end of all this in this conversation. But what do you do if you're trying to make things in this sort of environment? Do you just hyper focus and hope to find enough weirdos who are into the specific model of 130-year-old shotgun you like? Or do you go for this general thing to try to appeal to people who are opening up YouTube? They don't sub to any channels or look forward to any creators. They just swipe and stay when they find something that they happen to like in that moment. What do you do as a creator or somebody trying to offer any kind of value when you've got hyper-segmentation and then like a general 5-gallon bucket of slop on the other side?
Yeah, well, I think in a lot of ways it's a personal choice. I mean, I think, do you want to make slop? Then go ahead and make slop and, see if that works out for you. It's possible. I think that for most people who have the drive and the passion to spend time making something like YouTube videos, they probably would want to align that with something that they're naturally interested to begin with, and then hope to find an audience of people who are also interested in that. And then every now and then, lightning is caught in a bottle and you get something where it just so happens that your weird niche is extremely popular. Like who were the guys who retired? The guy who retired with his family last year, who was making like Alaskan survival videos that had like 30 million views, when he's just building like yurts in the woods, outdoor boys. Yeah. Like that's an example of, that is really, really rare, but that does happen where someone just does the thing that they're interested in. And then, oh my gosh, like 25 million people are also interested in this. That's really hard to manufacture. So You probably can't. You just have to cross your fingers and hope. But the other like culture examples that I really wanted to bring up that I think are interesting to think about are that there also is no longer in the United States like foundational country culture as far as like what the mythos is of the United States. So for a long time, it was Westerns, right? For like decades, Westerns dominated TV and film for like literal decades. It was like all people watched because that was a unifying, like cultural foundational understanding of who you were as an American, is that you are a descendant of this period of the country and these people who tamed the wilds of the country and put up these border towns and built railroads and, tussled with Native Americans, and all of that stuff was built into your identity as an American, and people liked watching that on the screen.
Yeah.
That's gone. That's completely dead.
Gone.
Like there are like no Westerns made at all anymore. And if they are, there's some kind of like weird perverted version like Westworld, which it itself was a remake of something from the 70s. So that doesn't count either.
Yeah. I mean, Yellowstone wasn't really a Western. And that's the closest big thing in recent memory. But like the big capital B last one was True Grit, which was a remake. It was fantastic. It was very good. It was awesome, but it wasn't original. John Wayne did that, and he did it quite well. But I mean, I don't think people even realize how far back that goes, because virtually nobody has heard of Tom Mix. Tom Mix was the first real Western star before Gene Autry and all of that. Tom Mix was a heroic staple. The legacy there was severely damaged. Which company had the fires that wiped out like 90% of all movies that they had? That massive like celluloid fire.
Yeah, I don't know if it was Paramount or who.
Yeah, Tom Mix's entire catalog was lost in that early on, so his name doesn't come up. But there was like a solid 75 years of this. And even before any type of media, other than print, the obsession there was over frontiers. And this is really the big loss to me, is that frontiers of any kind were exciting. All of that stuff was about, a new frontier, whether it was something like The Last of the Mohicans with New York being the frontier in the 1760s, to as you went further and further west, and you get like, Tombstone type area. Frontiers were awesome. And in frontiers, you have to be two people. You have to be the person that you came in with, and then you have to be a new one to navigate whatever new situation you're in. Even the Soviet Union was obsessed with American frontier stuff, to the point where they were producing, in 1989 even, they produced a series of stamps related to Last of the Mohicans. Frontiers are amazing. The only thing people are excited now, the only thing they feel frontier-esque with, is space. That really is the final frontier. But culturally, there aren't a lot of them to kind of celebrate anymore that are active or in the recent past. Kep says, and their own dating future. Yeah, absolutely. That's a horrible frontier. See, being on a frontier is hard. It's really hard. And there are good TV shows now, entertaining TV shows, about people, usually in their 20s, navigating the bizarre frontier of dating. There are a lot of good comedies like that over the years. But this is basically gone in a real way. Well, since nobody has any kind of frontier, that's a conceptual thing that is no longer shared by people within the U.S. or people worldwide. Pretty much everything is accessible. There are no geographic frontiers anymore. The best you can do is like, oh, here's a small town person navigating big city life. I'm like, okay, that's not a great story usually. But this is something that you had a relatively shared experience globally of pushing through something that combined your past and your future. And now even that is gone. You have to do it and hope that it resonates to somebody who really doesn't have much of a concept of a frontier, not in the world, not personally. You know, it's very hard to try to have, you know, the shared purpose, the shared attitudes, even when you don't even have shared concepts anymore.
No. Or morality. That's the other big thing that I wanted to mention is I watched a fantastic, I wish I could give her credit, but I can't remember her channel name. I'll try to pop it in the Discord after we record. There was a woman who I watched talking about the staleness in storytelling and story writing.
Oh, yeah. You linked me to that.
Yes.
Yeah, she was great.
Oh, she was awesome. She was fantastic. I was like hooked immediately. I was like, yes, you are my people once again. Like when I met the anime kid in college, it's like, you are my people. She was so lucid and cogent and thoughtful. And she was discussing how, you know, because I really like, if it's possible ever, to get to the bottom of something that's bothering me. And that's what I felt resonated in this video, is I felt like she was able to get to the bottom of one of the reasons that so many characters in all these shows are so bland and gray and boring. And her suggestion is that it's because without a shared morality, culturally, not within the characters, I mean, within the audience, within the viewership, if the viewership does not have a shared morality, then it's very, very difficult for a storyteller to write characters who are moral characters for a couple of reasons. One is that the audience might disagree with the morality of who's supposedly your protagonist, and now they hate what you've written. You know, they think that you're the bad guy. They think that you are, propagandizing, right? Because you are putting forward a specific morality that they disagree with, right?
Yeah.
So now you're going to get canceled. You're on a list of someone who's a bad guy because
you're a wrong thinker and a bad guy.
You are a wrong thinker. Exactly. The issue with how that translates into a boring character is that without a clear moral picture of the world that you create and the characters that inhabit that world, there's not a ton for them to do as far as character development or character arcs or tough decisions or sacrificing things or, weighing an action against their own morality. You know, that's a really compelling thing to do in a story, is when a character has to make a decision that, someone lives or dies, for instance, that goes completely against their own moral code. Do they make that choice? Do they break their moral code in order to save this person's life or whatever it is? That's a good story. If you strip the morality element, you're not left with a ton to do and a ton of juxtaposition to create and sort of buttress your characters against one another if they aren't conflicting on moral grounds. Now you're only conflicting on like very surface level grounds of just like feelings and needs and wants, which are kind of shallow and boring and just they don't move you emotionally, because it's like, well, I kind of don't care if this person wins and that person loses, or who really is the good guy and who really is the bad guy. And you see that in a lot of stories now too. And I've ranted about this before, where, there are all these movies where like, I don't know, what if the bad guy was actually a good guy? And you're just like, and I'm just like, I throw my hands up at that. I'm like, okay, First of all, that's not an idea. This could be like a whole other podcast, is what is an idea? But spinning an idea 180 degrees is not an idea.
No, it isn't.
That's not an idea.
No,
that's just taking an object and turning it around. Like, that's not an idea.
Yeah, and here's how it plays out in real life. We got a taste of this in like 1994, where some music producer said, you know, let's take two kids who are making music, but what they're going to do is they're going to put their clothes on backwards. And this is how crisscross was invented.
Yes. Yes, and they had a long and fabled career.
Yeah, there's a reason there isn't Crisscross's Greatest Hits Volume 7.
All right, well, we do have to wrap. But there's certainly more on this topic. There's more on the what is an idea topic. There's more on identity as a topic, which maybe we'll do next week, because I have a lot to say about that and how that has led to a lot of really boring movies and TV show and all of that, and books. We'll
need to have a super length episode on that. I think that we should do it, and we do it until the memory card is full.
Yeah, clear our calendars, the Identity Podcast.
That's right.
Seriously. Thank you to everyone for joining us for this recording. If you want to support the podcast, go to Patreon and become a patron. We'll be back next week. So until then, see you, Space Cowboys.
Thanks for listening to The Create Unknown. We make this show with the support of our patrons. 100% of that goes directly to keeping episodes going every week. And the recent support has been amazing. Sid Poke, NRM, Venture Addicts, Weezer Good, you all really do make this show happen. Thank you to the Tots and the Dumpster crew, old and new, who save tiny little lives every month. And thank you to our grizzled, battle-hardened child infantry. Clemente de los Santos, Dan the Latch, Demetrius Andrews, Erica, Ferry-kun, Jen Mafasanti, Kevin Menard, Mikhail Steinke, Monahim, Natsu, Penny Piddler, Ryan Steer, Ryan Kinder, Samuel Manser, Sean S., Sean Malone, and Tom Bidiover. And a tremendous shout-out to our elite baby gang commanders. Atrocious Scuff, Kat, Dojangles, Graham Robertson, James Gallagher, Jeff Davis, Orange Vanilla Coke, Patrick Pister, TCU's personal pilot, Andy, Ryan Carroll, Baseweight Vintos, Yeetus Deletus, Jonas Walter, Nathan Robinson, and of course, Trev Stead. You are the elite. Thank you as well to our indentured servants, producer, editor Ben Webster, Minecraft mogul Laterman, Discord kitten wrangler Conrad, and producer emeritus Dan Yosua. Thanks to Baseweight for use of Created in the Unknown for the opening theme. Thanks to Electro Voice for giving us mics to sound good on top of it, and thanks to Main Gear for powering all our PC endeavors. The Create Unknown is an Unknown Media production in partnership with Studio 71.